There's not many car brands that get a successful second act. There are brands that have such a loyal following that they're rescued and rise again like a phoenix, but Dacia was just another ex-communist state car company churning out dated copies of Western cars. It would take the tenacity of Dacia's management to put together not one, but two deals to save the jobs of Dacia's workers and help fuel a rise in Romania's economy. This is the Dacia story. In 1965, communist-run Romania got a new dictator, Nicolae Ceausescu, and although Romania was under a heavy influence from the Soviet Union, he would start to conduct a more independent foreign policy to build an industrial economy. So the following year it was decided that instead of buying cars from other countries, Romania would make them itself. It wasn't that Romania had no experience making vehicles, they almost made a car in 1945, the Malaxa. Roman had been building trucks since 1921, UTB started making tractors in 1925, Rocar weren't making cars but vans and buses since 1951, and in 1957 ARO was building off-roaders. But the country didn't have the necessary experience making passenger cars and needed a partner. Other communist countries around them were taking a similar tack. That same year, Russian VAZ would start a partnership with Fiat to make what would become the Lada, and Zastava in Yugoslavia, the company that would make the Yugo, had been working with Fiat since the 1950s. The team charged with finding a partner turned to Western Europe. The goal was to find a mid-size car with an engine between 1 and 1.3 litres. The Alfa Romeo GT 1300, Austin Mini, Fiat 1100D, Peugeot 204 and Renault 10 would duke it out for the honours of becoming Romania's next top car. The winner would be Renault, and it was agreed to produce the Renault 12, but with production of the 12 delayed until 1969 and Romania wanting to start production before then, Renault offered the 16 instead. After some discussions, it was decided that the newly formed Dacia company, named after the historic region that made up Romania, would build rebadged Renault 8s until the Renault 12 was ready for production. This would be a pure assembly contract, although Dacia would weld and paint the bodies. It was a win for Renault, who made money manufacturing the parts and licensing the design. Construction of the factory near Pitești would begin in 1966, being completed just 18 months later. By August 1968, production had begun and the first Dacia 1100 rolled off the production line. It was supposedly presented to Romanian leader Nicolae Ceausescu, but in reality he got the 75th car, likely the best of the batch, for their illustrious leader. Police versions would have 4 headlights on the front, which would at least give you a fighting chance of spotting them when speeding. The car wasn't cheap, it was the equivalent of the average person's salary for over 4 years. Imagine paying 4 times your annual salary for the car that you drive today. But despite this, demand was high, and soon Gallic cars were appearing the length and breadth of Romania. In the first 5 years, over 38,000 Dacia 1100s were made. Just 1 year later, the promised rebadged Renault 12 appeared as the Dacia 1300, and this would eventually take over as the only car produced. While the 1100 was early 1960s technology, being rear-engined, the new 1300 was front-engined and front-wheel drive. A modern car to advance Romania's economy as it approached the 1970s. The 1300 was available in 3 trim levels: Standard, Lux and Romanian Communist Party member level, Super Lux. Those party members could expect such benefits as a radio, sun visor with mirror, and not just a glove box, but an illuminated glove box. The benefits of power. But back in France, the equivalent Renault 12 TS could be bought by almost anybody. In 1973, the Combi Estate appeared, giving greater practicality. Despite being called the 1300, a 1.1 litre engine was also offered, but calling it the 1100 would just have been confusing. To widen the range, Dacia started offering a pickup version as the 1302 in 1975. That same year, Renault started importing parts for the Renault Estafette van that Dacia started assembling as the D6, but this was short-lived and only 600 or so were ever made. In 1976, Dacia was joined by a second Romanian car manufacturer, and their story is also worth a mention here. Alt-Sit was a joint venture with the other French car company, PSA, and produced small Citroëns. This was until PSA withdrew from the venture and Daewoo stepped in and started assembling cars like the Espero. This continued until the early 2000s when GM bought most of Daewoo but not the Romanian factory, and they didn't allow them to export Daewoos to the rest of Europe. Thankfully, Ford stepped in 2008 and the factory has been making cars such as the Ford Transit Connect and more recently the Ford Puma. From 1979, Dacia assembled the Renault 20 as a Dacia 2000, but only in limited numbers. This again was reserved for Communist Party members who'd grown tired of the luxury of the Superlux 1300. But with limited numbers being produced, servicing and spare parts was always a challenge, so despite those fancy electric windows and cruise control, it was probably better to get a 1300. By 1984, 2000 production had ended, and by the late 1980s, the upgraded 1320 model was the car to have. Despite now offering 2 Renault models, by 1979 the licensing deal had ended. Dacia could still make the cars, and over the last 10 years had been slowly making more and more parts of the car locally, creating local jobs and building a local manufacturing economy. With the 1300 still a strong seller, this gave Dacia confidence to start making changes. The updated model was eventually named the 1310 and looked similar to the 1975 Renault 12 update, but included new quad headlights. With the end of European Renault 12 production in 1980, Dacia started exporting their version to Europe to bring in foreign currency to help their struggling economy. By 1982, the Dacia Denim, as it was called, appeared in British showrooms, where it would join Ladas and Skodas in the crowded Western European car market. With a 5-speed gearbox and electric windows, it was the most expensive of the bunch, and sales faltered. By 1984, in the UK at least, the Dacia Denim had disappeared. Romania would try exporting another car with the Dacia Duster in 1984. This wasn't from Dacia's factory, but from ARO, the 4x4 off-roading company started in the 1950s. It would sell moderately well until 1990. Inside Romania, the 1302 pickup was updated as the 1304. Dacia would make an economy 1.2 litre version of the 1310 as the 1210 and a higher end model as the 1410 Sport. In 1980, Dacia took the next step and started work designing a new Romanian people's car that could hold 2 adults and 2 children, a maximum speed of 43 miles an hour and good fuel economy. It had to be economical. The Romanian economy was now in meltdown and people could barely afford the fuel for a car, let alone the car itself. As an example of how bad the economy was doing, the government stopped production of heaters so less electricity would be used. Nicolae Ceausescu, still Romania's leader and very unpopular at this stage, challenged the designers to make the metal the same thickness as beer cans, despite the fact that this was too thin to be practical. It was all to try to save money on production. The new car, the Dacia 500 or La Stune, would have a 0.5 litre 2-cylinder engine. Progress was slow and it would take 8 years until the first one was manufactured in 1988. When it did arrive, it wasn't popular, and due to poor build quality, not many of them survive today. Production did last until 1991, which was longer than Nicolae Ceausescu, who was tried and found guilty in a show trial and executed following the routing of communist governments across Eastern Europe in the late 1980s. Dacia's main car was still the stalwart 1300, and an update appeared in 1989 along with a hatchback version, the 1325 in 1990. Dacia would begin limited collaborations with Western car companies using VW's 1.6 litre diesel engine. 1998 would see Dacia clock up 2 million cars produced, and the 1310, now 30 years old, would receive another facelift. It was out of date, but it was cheap, and so continued to sell well, selling over 75,000 in 1997 and making it Romania's top-selling car. But Dacia's future clearly lay in newer models. In 1983, work had begun on a second new car, the Dacia Nova, and with no money, it would have an even longer gestation period, 12 years to be exact, as it would take until 1995 until the car appeared. The 1.4 litre engine came from the 1310, but the larger 1.6 litre engine was sourced from Citroën via fellow Romanian car company Altit that was still working with PSA at the time. It was a replacement for the 1325 hatchback, but the 1310 saloon, estate and pickup versions soldiered on. The Nova's 80s origins could be seen in the outdated styling, and Dacia was still battling build quality issues. But the car showed Dacia could make its own vehicles if it had the right funding. And funding was the main problem. South Korean car company Daewoo had invested in Romanian rival Altit, so Dacia worked to create a deal with Hyundai to build the Accent, creating a sort of a Korean showdown in Romania. The money from building the Accent could help fund Dacia's new vehicle, codenamed D33, and Hyundai agreed Dacia could use the engine from the Accent. But all thoughts of working with Hyundai ended when Dacia agreed to be purchased by Renault in 1999. Dacia had been improving the build quality of its Nova, and with a modern Renault engine and some updates, it was reintroduced as the Supernova in 2000. With higher equipment levels, it sold better than the old car and started to establish Dacia in Eastern Europe as a resurgent brand. Renault wanted to build on Dacia's reputation in Eastern Europe with a brand new car, but in the meantime, Romanians needed cars and Dacia's workers needed something to do, so the 1310 kept being sold, with a restyled Supernova appearing in 2003 as the Silenza. The styling would foreshadow Dacia's first car in the new Renault era, the Logan. This would replace the stalwart 1310 that finally bowed out in 2006 after an amazing 37-year life. Renault was in a period of transition in the late 1990s. Recently privatised, leaders such as Carlos Ghosn were reducing costs and looking for new ways to expand its business, such as the deep partnership with Nissan. Renault's plan for the new Dacia Logan was to create a cut-price car that would sell in Eastern Europe and maybe in Western Europe as well. Ladas were selling in Russia mainly because they were half the price of Renault's, but why settle for old technology? Could Renault design a car that cost the same as the Lada but with an updated design? The goal was to build a car that would sell for £4,500, and they came close with the final price of the Logan starting at £5,200. It used the same chassis as the Renault Clio, with higher ground clearance to tackle all kinds of road conditions. Inside, you didn't get much, but it had 4 doors, a steering wheel, drove well and started every morning with a 3-year 62,000-mile warranty. And for the money, it was a bargain. And it wasn't completely stripped down. Electric windows, electric mirrors, ABS, power steering and air conditioning were options. Romanians snapped it up, and soon Dacia's second attempt at exporting to Western Europe would be a resounding success. By 2007, it was being sold in 51 countries, and lucky Brits and Indians soon got to drive one as Dacia's cheap and cheerful cars spread across the globe. More versions of the Logan would be available in 2006 with the MCV or multi-convivial vehicle, whatever that means, the 2007 Logan pickup and van, and a hatchback version as the 2008 Dacia Sandero and Sandero stepway crossover. The Sandero was a watershed moment for Dacia, doubling their European sales almost overnight. Dacias wouldn't only be produced in Romania though. In 2005, factories in Colombia and Russia were making the Logan, Iran and India in 2007, South Africa in 2009, with assembly in Morocco and Brazil. The French-designed Logan would be known as a Nissan, Mahindra, Lada and an EMC. Renault saw talent in their Romanian workforce. A 2,500-person development and testing centre was set up in 2006, along with a styling office the following year and a testing centre in 2010. The result would be Logan styling updates, concept cars, and a new logo for a new forward-thinking brand. But it wasn't all plain sailing. In 2008, Dacia's workers struck for a 65% pay rise in line with workers in France. They finally agreed to a 23% rise, twice the Romanian national average wage. With demand for small SUVs and crossovers growing, Dacia's next car would be the Duster. Named after the ARO off-roader Dacia had sold back in the 1980s, this would again be on a common platform used by many Renault and Nissan cars. Like the Logan and Sandero, it would delve headlong into Renault's parts bin, with a range of lively but fuel-efficient engines and four-wheel drive. This resulted in what was essentially a larger Nissan Juke for about 2/3 of the price, and what's not to like about that? In a repeat of the Dacia 1300 introduction, the Romanian president would become the first Dacia Duster owner in Romania. The Duster would exceed the success of the Logan and soon became Renault Group's most popular vehicle. Building on this, Dacia updated the Logan in 2012 and launched two new vehicles, the Docker and the Logi. All three cars were based on an evolution of the older Logan and Duster platform. The Docker was what Dacia called a leisure activity vehicle that could carry 5-6 footers and about a month's worth of luggage in the back. And like Renault's Kangoo, it could easily be sold as a panel van. It's a testament to Dacia's selling power that Renault blocked its sale in Western Europe to protect Renault Kangoo's sales. The Logi was a very similar vehicle, designed as a more comfortable MPV. Both cars would get their own crossover stepway version in 2014. These would be the first Dacia models not made in Romania, instead being built in Morocco, Argentina and India. It would gain some notoriety when a 3-litre V6 four-wheel drive version won the Andros Trophy Ice Racing Championships, piloted by ex-Formula 1 driver Alain Prost. But Dacia's main sellers were the Sandero and the Duster. The Mark II Sandero arrived in 2012 based on an updated Duster platform. With the Duster facelift in 2013, these cars were looking less like bare-bones cars, and with a growing feature list, it was harder to tell them apart from much pricier competition. But despite airbags and other safety features, they lagged the competition in the Euro NCAP safety ratings. The Duster got an extra bit of publicity when in 2019 Pope Francis chose the Duster as his next Popemobile. A glass structure was installed along with a rear bench seat. This joined the Pope's fleet of a Fiat Campagnola, Mercedes M-Class, Jeep Wrangler, Fiat 500L and his personal transport, a 1984 Renault 4 GTL. Today you can buy a Sandero or Duster with a plethora of modern conveniences. For under £10,000 you can get a Sandero with power-assisted steering, CarPlay Android Auto with digital radio, cruise control, heated door mirrors, rear parking sensors, ABS and emergency brake assist, air conditioning and electric windows. With a basic Renault Clio starting at almost £16,000, it's not hard to see why Dacia's are big sellers. In 2005, Dacia's Romanian factory clocked up 2.5 million cars, produced after 36 years of production. The next 2.5 million took just 9 years and showed just how popular the new cars were. Dacia's factory in Mioveni now produces more cars per year than any other factory in the Renault Group. The competition, of course, had twigged that people are willing to pay less for simple-ish cars. Companies such as VW, SAIC, Hyundai and Kia have realised that building cars in developing countries with inexpensive labour is the key to success. In the 1960s and 70s, the Mini and Robin Reliant were entry-level vehicles. In the 80s, it was outdated cars like the Lada Riva and Dacia's own 1310. But today's entry-level cars are a real force to be reckoned with. As for the future, Dacia is dipping its toes in the EV market with the Spring Electric. The car will have a 140-mile range with an unsubsidised price around £16,000. With a European market share that's grown 7-fold since 2004 and Romania's factories churning out 500,000 cars every year, Dacia's second act is looking very, very strong. The Alfa Romeo GT 1300 would build rebadged Renault 8s until the Renault 12 was ready for production. And yes, I'm going to keep saying Renault that way. It might annoy you. Is it Renault or is it Renault? You say Renault, I say Renault. You say Peugeot, I say Peugeot. After some discussions, it was decided that the newly formed Dacia company, named after the historic, I cannot say it. With a 5-speed gearbox and electric windows, it was the most expensive. These would be the first Dacia models not made in Romania. How many different ways can I say this? These would be the first Dacia models not made in Romania. These would be the first Dacia models not made in Romania. These would be the first Dacia models not made in Romania. I have a squeaky chair. This joined the Pope's feet. Pope's feet? The Pope had a feet of cars.